Okay, we're live, Ricky.
Sweet.
Hi everybody. My name is Allison Madison. I'm the program coordinator at Wisconsin Saltwise, and I'm excited to be back again March 12th, 2025 for another Saltwise Wednesday webinar. And our guest speaker today is Ricky Neth. He's the mechanic at the City of Glendale in the Milwaukee area. And I've known Ricky for a few years now. I think Ricky has gone to maybe about as many Saltwise smart salting classes as anyone I know. And he's really been an engine of change in Glendale, and I would say even kind of beyond, as he's worked to network with a lot of other mechanics at local municipalities in the Milwaukee, especially the North Shore area. And so excited to have him on today to talk a little bit more about changes with their operations. And as you saw from all the promotional materials, the work of his brainchild with turning a fire truck into a snow fighting machine. So just a little bit of housekeeping that if you have any questions at all or comments, would encourage you to drop those into the chat. It's always fun to have a little bit of audience interaction. And then I'll ask any questions of Ricky at the end. So if the chat doesn't work for whatever reason, you can always email me, wisaltwise@gmail.com. So with that, Ricky, I'll turn it over to you and you can pull up your slides.
Alrighty. I think we're working, right?
That looks great.
Sweet. Well, again, I'm Ricky with the City of Glendale. I've been here for 5 years now for this year, yeah. I started off as just generic labor and kind of moved my way up to mechanic. Um, and in 2021, oh, oh, there we go. 2021, I had the opportunity to get our hands on this fire truck, and it actually kind of came up on a whim. It wasn't budgeted for or anything like that. Uh, we got lucky enough to actually purchase it during COVID pricing stuff, so it was quite expensive, but it was still better than buying new. Uh, we purchased this, kind of got it, and wasn't really sure what we were gonna do. And came up with this idea to start this conversion to make it a brine truck. It wasn't simple. Uh, I actually used a local company, Casper's Truck Equipment, which is probably 3, 4 miles away. Uh, there are local upfitters, so they do all of our big patrol trucks. So I figured I'd reach out to them because they're the ones that would be doing any kind of upfitting on any of our other trucks that I wouldn't be capable of doing. Uh, and they worked closely with Force America, which is basically all of our trucks, our plow trucks have Force America stuff in it. So I figured try and keep it the same so it's easier for everyone to operate. You learn one truck, you kind of learn them all, and you don't have to retrain anybody. I worked with the rep through Force about building a system, and it kind of was cobbled together is a great way to explain it, but it actually really isn't after it's all said and done. We ended up building like a price sheet for all the parts that I needed, and then we had to order it all. Uh, Obviously, none of the stuff was really in stock, so there's going to be some wait time for a build. So once I ordered everything, I kind of just took it upon myself to start ripping this thing apart and basically take the decals off for the North Shore Fire Department that we got it from. I had to take some of the lights off because obviously it's red and white and city doesn't use red and white lights. I happened to be lucky enough and have a whole bunch of old caution lights laying around in a back room and kind of retrofitted everything as best as I could to make it work. And in the process, I realized that the whole dash on this thing that controls all the lights, I'd be able to reuse it all. So all I had to do is basically just remove an old light and install what I wanted on there. Had to make custom brackets and stuff for for some of the lights, but for the most part, it turned out great just for the fact that everything was pretty much pre-wired. So as a mechanic standpoint, when you get something brand new, it's not always like plug and play for the most part, but this kind of was because all the wiring was already existing. I was just replacing the lights, and for the most part, it's basically changing the color of the lights because I didn't want red anymore. Um, this was before the green amber law passing, where municipalities could use green amber, so we only have amber lights on there. But as soon as some lights start failing, I'll be replacing it with green amber. Um, Once we got past that, I had to get into the tank section, and this was a tender, so it was not a pumper truck. It was actually just a giant tank on the back of the truck, and it had some chutes on the rear. As you can see where those bolts are, those there was a an electric and air operated chute that would come out of the side of the truck, and there was one on the left side and on the right side, so they could dump water into like the temporary holding pools. Um, I removed all of that because I didn't want any of it to be leaking. And frankly, if one of those were to be switched on, it would empty about 3,000 gallons in under 3 minutes. And frankly, dumping 3,000 gallons of brine on the road at one spot is not ideal. So we have a local rubber company in our area that's actually within our city limits. And I reached out to them to get something that would hold up to brine and I'd be able to compress it to make a good seal. Measured, went over there, picked it all up, put some thicker plexiglass on the outside to get it to seal nice, bolted it all in, and it seals perfect, surprisingly. It was on a whim and it worked great. And I did that for both sides. And there was also a fixed rear chute on the rear that kind of was like always there. And it had a giant lever to open the valve. I did that on that one as well. And that worked out perfect. I actually filled the tank with water to make sure nothing was leaking because I mean, kind of got to test your work. And then once we did all the tank conversion stuff, I actually kind of got done with the truck. And at that time, parts had started showing up for our conversion. So I sent the truck out to Casper's and they started doing their install. Their install was kind of easier for me. I could have done the upfitting myself, but I'm a one-man band here. So I don't have the time or the resources to spend a month or 2 months building something. So it just made more sense to send it out. And it was kind of in the beginning of summer, if I remember right. So I was hoping to have it back by winter time. And I sent it out. They did their install and put all their valving in the way that it was spec'd by the forest representative. And once it was all out there getting installed, I think they had it for just over a month, I believe it was. In the process of them building it, I kind of took the leap into learning about liquid salt stuff, brine, because I'd never really dabbled in it before. So previously, before getting the fire truck, we purchased this slide-in unit from a local municipality, and it was a used unit. I'm not sure why they didn't want it anymore, but it was a cheap thing for us, so they purchased it, and it wasn't perfect. So we had been using, I think we just started using it that winter. So this was installed and in working order for what we thought. And we were trying to figure out what rates to spray at and all that because this was a complete learning curve. So this sliding unit was basically like our test subject. And the fire truck was going to be, I guess, the better option to use after I figured out what this thing did. Um, once this thing I got running to the point where it would spray consistently, I started doing the math on its rates for speeds and gallons per lane mile. I know some of you watching might be in acreage, but since we're a municipality, we do everything per lane mile. Our rates were quite low coming out of this, and this is a hydraulically driven unit, so it's can only pump as fast as the hydraulics on the truck. And some of the nozzles were different orifice sizes from the left boom or the center boom or the right boom. Once I started doing all the math to figure out our rates coming out of the orifice sizes out of either booms, I had to understand the application rates of what you set it to and how much comes out. So now that I know what's actually happening on the truck, I need to know what what rate I need to set it at to get it to do what I want. So when we first started spraying out of that slide-in unit, we were approximately doing about 10 gallons a lane mile. At the time of starting brine, we had no idea what we were really doing. So 10 gallons a lane mile may have been a lot to us. And actually, I don't think anyone really did the math to figure out what we were doing. Uh, so once the 10 gallons a lane mile was understood that that's what we were roughly applying at, it was probably 10 to 15, depending on our speeds. I started doing some research to figure out what was like a standard for application rates. And Allison does have some charts on Wisconsin Saltwise for your standard application rates for liquid. And there's no perfect example for what's going to work for everyone. Uh, so it was kind of like a trial and error thing. So the only way to really change our rates was change orifice sizes. So changing orifice sizes was the only way to increase the spray, the volume coming out of the unit. So if you look at the picture, all the way on the left is what we started with when I first took over spraying with that thing. And I think I can't remember the drill bit size on that, to be honest, because it was so long ago now. But it's kind of shows you the step program of like how we went from this to this. Now, the trial and error side of it was, and this is one of the things I did not know until after the fact, that on a three boom setup for spraying, the center boom has a large has a smaller orifice size than the side booms. If you actually look back at the booms on this truck, there's more nozzles on the center boom than there is on the side booms. Now, to make sense of that, so that far right nozzle is 060, I believe, is the pressure wash nozzle, is what it is, which these are pressure washing nozzles. Those are on the side booms. So if I remember counting right, we had 8 nozzles on the center boom and there's 4 on the side boom. So the side boom has to be double the size of the center boom. So you output the same amount when you turn on a side boom compared to the center. Now, not everyone's going to use a side boom or has the option for a side boom. We love it just because of the fact when we're brining, we can turn on a side boom to get a turn lane or like a cutout in a median. It makes it a lot easier for us to spray when you don't have to backtrack and do those areas. Since you're already going down the lane, you flip a switch, you can spray a lane that's next to you and you don't have to backtrack to do it. We're extremely heavy when we do that. It makes us be more efficient, for lack of a better term. Um, Once the nozzle size was kind of figured out, I had to recalibrate the entire unit because it changes your rates. And with the Force America controller, it's actually really nice to be able to calibrate. You can kind of just tell it to calibrate. It dumps liquid out. You put some buckets underneath and you tell it how much came out for the amount of time that you ran it. So in the time from when we first started doing 10 to 15 gallons a lane mile to going to this larger orifice size, we went from 10 to 15 to capable of 50 to 55 gallons a lane mile. Now, obviously, it's capable of doing that, but your speed makes the difference. So if you're doing 100 miles an hour, it's not going to be able to do 55 gallons a lane mile. But if you're doing 10 miles an hour, it might be able to do 55 gallons a lane mile. Now, also when you turn on your side booms also require more volume. So if you're doing 10 miles an hour and you have all three booms on, your 55 gallons a lane mile might go down. But if you slow your speed down, you can cover the same amount of area, or more area, I should say, with all three booms rather than a single. Um, Once we got it all dialed in and it was actually spraying at a good rate that I thought was okay compared to all the research that I did, I think that was beginning of 22, I believe it was. The first half of the season, we were brining with that slide-in unit, and basically the first half of the season, we didn't have to come into salt or plow or anything, which from the prior season, we were brining and still coming into salt and plow and take care of road maintenance. And this next year, all of a sudden, the whole entire first half of the season, no one's coming in to plow or salt or do anything. I mean, given the snowstorms we had were a little bit lighter and they weren't large quantities, but it was a huge difference in like call-ins for us at least. Um, and this was only treating at 50 to 55 gallons a lane mile. It wasn't really perfect per se. We weren't still sure exactly what we were doing. And actually, I should say I wasn't really sure what we were doing yet because I was still learning. Um, but the fact that the whole entire first half of that season that we didn't have to come in and salt or plow at all was a huge game changer. And for us, that I think that season we probably saved roughly 500 to 600 tons of salt. I think was what our leftover was. Because I mean, normally we'd be salting for every kind of snow on the ground, at least slightly, to keep the roads safe. Once I learned the application rates with this slide-in unit, we kind of got the fire truck back and kind of applied my knowledge that I learned with the other truck to this. And given the nozzle sizes were already predetermined and they were already installed on the unit, but I had to figure out what it should be applying at because they installed everything. They don't calibrate anything at Casper's or pretty much any upfitter at that point. Even when you get a brand new patrol truck, nothing's calibrated, or you should assume nothing is calibrated. You should always check it yourself, including granular. Uh, so we got this back, and I decided to test its rates. And at the time, it was kind of run it wide open and see what it can do. And it was capable of doing over 100 gallons a lane mile. And it was for a standpoint of from us spraying at 50 to 55 gallons a lane mile to 100 or over 100, it was awesome. It's like, okay, well, we treated this entire first half of the season at 50, 55 gallons a lane mile, and we didn't have to come in at all, given it was like quarter-inch storms. But now if we can apply heavier and we get a 2 inch or a 3 inch or a 4 inch or more storm, maybe it will work better, right? And at this concept, it was kind of burn off the snow rather than mechanically remove it. Now, at this time, we didn't know that you kind of break the bond of snow to roadway. And this is about the time when I started going to the Saltwise seminars and learning all about that. So I dialed in the fire truck's spray rates at 100. I It's modest at 100, but it would do more. But I wasn't sure if more was worth it. So once we got it set at 100 and we started spraying, it worked perfectly. Being able to do side booms, turn lanes, and with the amount of pressure that we had coming out of a gas-driven pump, it was phenomenal. We could do 25 miles an hour and do 90 to 100 gallons a lane mile without a problem. And it was great because we would take with the old setup, we were taking about 3 days to treat the entire city. And those were roughly about 10-hour days, maybe 11, depending on the sunlight. And it kind of sucked because you kind of had to play 3 days in advance for a storm, which we all know the weather's not perfect and you don't know exactly what's going to happen until it happens. So playing the game of weather, we would go treat and either it would work or it wouldn't. Now with a second truck that's capable of driving faster and applying more, we cut it down from 3 days down to basically one. And there was still a little bit of learning curve and application yet. Uh, Trying to figure out efficiencies of which way to do it. Me and another guy were kind of like the brine truck guys, and we just every time we had to spray, it was us in the trucks. So you kind of figure out your own routine and what works best. There's some learning curves in the efficiencies of driving. Uh, Trying to plan it out so you run out of liquid and you're close to the shop to refill, or starting farther and working your way back to the shop. There was all different things that we learned in the process that kind of got us to where we are today. Uh, that the first season of using the fire truck was phenomenal, like I said before. But we did learn that the pump was not happy when we would stop spraying. So there wasn't a whole lot of information that we got from the force rep about using this. And all of a sudden we started having some issues with spraying. It was making noises and it just wasn't happy. It wasn't putting out what it was putting out originally. And inevitably what ended up happening is the when we stopped spraying, and we were spraying at about 100 gallons a lane mile, when we stopped spraying and you turned off the spray bars, the pump was deadheading. So basically the water is getting pumped to nowhere. It's just a brick wall. And what I learned from that is that the pump is got so much pressure in it, it was actually loosening some of the hardware for the impeller for the pump. And it was frankly a rough learning curve because I didn't understand why it wasn't pumping, and I wasn't sure exactly how it happened. And frankly, the noises it was making, it sounded like it blew up a motor. And with some off time at night, I took it apart and realized that the impeller was loose. Retightened the impeller, put it all back together, and it was back to working again. And I think a week later, same thing happened. And I'm like, well, what's going on that this is loosening up? So I actually contacted the manufacturer for those pumps. And you can buy this pump individual from the gas engine, or you can buy it as a whole. I contacted them and kind of explained to them what I was using it for and how it was being used in function, right? And I explained to him like, hey, I'm doing about 100 gallons a lane mile out of this thing. I mean, this thing's running wide open. And when I hit a button, it's not spraying anything anymore, but it's still pumping. Well, this entire setup was set up to have a bypass valve, which I had closed because you get more fluid out, way more volume. And no one really explained that to us when we took it over, and the forest rep wasn't sure what we should be doing. He said, I'd run it closed. It shouldn't hurt anything. Well, a couple months later, now we know that you can't deadhead it, is the technical term for it. So the bypass valve, I actually kind of started opening up slowly and redoing the calibration because it gives you the amounts, the volumes that you can get out at a certain speed. So I would open the valve a little bit, do the calibration. Okay, it's still doing 100 gallons a lane mile. Okay, open the valve a little bit more, do the calibration again. Oh, it's still doing 100 gallons a lane mile. Okay, start opening it some more and more and more. And I finally got it dialed down to the point where it can continuously pump back to itself and return back to the tank, and it doesn't affect the impeller at all. Uh, and it just so happened that it kind of came to a point where it it tapered off, the rates tapered off to about 80 gallons a lane mile. So now we can brine at 80 gallons a lane mile consistently. And that's pump wide. the gas engine's wide open on this, the valves are wide open and it's spraying cons consistently, right? And in some cases, when you drive slower, you don't have to close the bypass valve. You can actually spray a little bit more out of this with the side booms on. You just have to drive a little bit slower so it can keep up. Um, but that's when we started treating roads at 80 gallons a lane mile. Well, once we started treating at 80 gallons a lane mile, we realized that we were getting the same effect at 80 that we were 100, which it's like, well, great. That's a great way to kind of learn is trial and error for the most part. Uh, Going from 100 to 80 was huge for us because you're not burning as much brine. And frankly, we have to make it. So, and we only have storage of about 12,000 gallons. So filling this truck is about 2,800 gallons roughly, and our other unit, which holds 1,000. So you can go through a lot very quickly. Um, once once it was once we realized that I could spray less, I recalibrated again to understand if I could lower it some more. Now, once I once I calibrated and I realized that I could go lower, it was it's kind of it was kind of like a call of okay, do I keep treating at the same rate I'm treating at, or do I lower the rate and do more trial and error to figure out where the best point is? Well, for our instance, we had some management changes, and it just worked out that keeping it where the rate was ideal for us because our location close to the lake, we do get, I think they call it lake enhancement now or lake effect. We do get some, and unfortunately, if we treat at 80 gallons a lane, or let's say we treat at 50 gallons a lane mile, and we get extra snow after a snowstorm. So you have a snowstorm roll through, you get 2 inches, and then a couple hours later, we get another 2 inches. Well, if I treat it at 80, it's better than treating it at 50 because it will last longer for us. And that was one of the things that where like efficiency came in. So it was like, okay, we're going to treat at 80 gallons a lane mile, knowing that we're supposed to get roughly 3 inches of snow. Well, that 3 inches of snow could turn into 5. Now, we may be here ready to plow or salt or whatever we need to do, but the thing is you kind of got to play the long term. So it made more sense for us to treat at a higher rate and kind of like wait to hold on mechanically removing. So you could get the most amount of snow on the roadway to mechanically remove it. And that's how we treat now to this day. So once I dialed it into the 80 gallons lane mount, we started learning about how it still works with lake effect or lake enhancement, sorry. We kept doing the same thing over and over again. It was basically repetition. And this time now we have 2 trucks running. So this is where our efficiency came in. 2 guys running the same trucks every time, you kind of figure out your routine gets dialed in. And now we can treat the entire city, I think, in roughly like 9 hours, which is phenomenal. And depending on what snow's coming, we dial back. We have now learned to dial back on liquid rates. So if we're only going to get a dusting, we may only treat at 20 gallons a lane mile. And that's everywhere. We can do, and we treat our main roads and our residential roads separately because we have 2 trucks. The slide-in unit isn't really capable of the higher rates at a higher speed. So we send that into the residential roads. And our fire truck is capable of way more, so that does all the main roads, which have higher speeds. And to keep up with traffic, it just makes more sense. So now that we've reduced the time of treating, now we kind of like dial it back. And now we started changing our application rates per storm. Now, this is more of a recent thing in this past year that we started doing, but it's still a trial and error aspect. And I kind of just went over all this already. But yeah, so this is what we started with, what we're at now. And I I do have some more charts that I created. I didn't include in this, but we started doing some like post-storm treating as the snow's coming. We just don't have the capability of keeping up with it because 2 vehicles instead of a fleet of them. Um, the learning doesn't ever stop though for us. We've been doing trial and error learning for 4 years now. Unfortunately, we don't have the equipment truck wise to do the entire city in like a couple of hours. Eventually, we'll probably be at that point. The big deal is like getting into the liquid aspect for us was a huge game changer. I think we have at last year we had a surplus of 600 tons of salt, I think it was. May have been like 400. Still a decent amount. And that's all contributed to brine actually. And we do make our own brine in-house. I believe our brine maker, we purchased one brine maker and we ended up upgrading to the next size up. That was more efficient. I think that was around $100,000. And we have, I think with labor, fuel, salt savings, all that brine maker has probably paid for itself, at least like break even. Obviously we're still going with the same maker yet, so it's going to definitely save us more money. Um, Over the 3 years, I believe I did the math, we're going to be at the aspect of rounds. If you look at today's prices for salt, I think we're in the savings of about $72,000 for the last 3 to 4 years of salt consumption. So that's taking all the surplus of salt that we've had and what we've cut back on, and it comes out to about $72,000 at today's price, which I think our price today is about $80 a ton delivered. Um, and for that aspect, we've since we've saved so much money, I'm kind of hoping to try and reinvest our savings into our snow and ice maintenance stuff. Um, it's difficult to do that in a municipality. It's kind of obvious. But the whole idea of the liquid saving money is a great way to start. I would not say that you should go out and buy a truck and convert it yourself. You kind of put the carriage before the horse. It doesn't make sense. Start small, work your way up. Uh, we've done, we've started treating some sidewalks, nothing crazy. Just our local city hall and some of the sidewalks around our building, just to test things out. And it works for us. Uh, it's a great way to try new things and figure out what everything you have is capable of. Uh, Ultimately, the fire truck was a huge game changer for us. I think the overall price in that unit, I think we have about $55,000 invested into that, including purchasing the truck. Um, I think the new patrol truck that I have set up coming is around, I think it's just over $300,000, and it would basically be able to do the same thing. So it's a huge price difference. Uh, Thinking outside the box for us was a great way to save us money and get us into the liquid aspect. And I mean, obviously you can see the savings. It works for us. Um, Especially if you drive in our streets in the wintertime, you'll be able to see the difference compared to some of the other municipalities in our area and even the county for them for that aspect. Our roads are usually way better than the counties. Uh, and I believe that'd be it.
All right. Thank you, Ricky. I think my favorite was hearing how many times you said the word calibration, right?
Yeah.
Don't assume things are calibrated and continue to calibrate as you make those adjustments. I've got a couple questions for you, but I just want to open it up to everybody who is joining in live. If you want to either leave a comment or a thank you for Ricky, or if you have a question, really would be happy to take those and get them answered. So, Ricky, I guess I'm kind of curious. It sounds like as you guys got started with liquids, you had this vehicle, the slide-in unit. You didn't really know what you were doing with it. You were putting liquid down. You realized it's 10 gallons a lane mile, which is really low, right? I'd say kind of the standard in the industry is about 40 gallons a lane mile for
Mhm.
that pre-treatment, the anti-icing, which it sounds like you're like a little above with like the 50 on some roads and a bit above with the 80, but it sounds like you're still that's still allowing you to have overall like salt savings. But I am curious, it sounds like with some of the smaller events, all that's needed is that anti-icing or the pre-treatment before the storm. When you're doing when you have a larger event, and are you still post-treating with rock salt? And if so, then have you been able to drop those rates now that you're doing the liquid pre-treatment?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. We when we started out doing the 80 gallons a lane mile with the fire truck, and that's what we've been consistently doing. We've actually, as of this year, we dropped it back down. We've dropped it down more. So we're doing 70 gallons a lane mile. And this is all on our main roadways, I should say. Our residentials we still treat at 50 to 55 just because of because of the traffic change. Our mains are, or I call them our main roads, are like extremely traffic heavy. So uh, you get a lot of like traffic which stirs it all up. So it actually kind of melts a little bit faster when you get snow. And if we end up getting more snow, and especially if it's a wet heavy, right? The brine doesn't hold as long. Uh, so to answer your question, basically, when we treat it 70 or 80, however you want to look at it, uh, we don't actually really salt unless the roads get overtaken. So if I were to brine today at 70 gallons lane mile and it snowed tonight and we were here, we would wait until we have to plow before we would salt. So if unless it's like a traffic issue where it would come down to like, okay, it's going to be rush hour, we we might go out and like salt lightly at like 100 pounds a lane mile with some pre-wet to kind of make it hold longer so we can plow closer to like rush hour, if that makes sense. So instead of plowing now, we would rather plow at 2:30 or 3 closer to the rush hour event, you know? So if the brine's not going to hold off, we would salt then. But for the most part, I think for the length of times we would get with the snow starting, we could usually hold off 2 to 3 or more hours applying brine in the anti-icing form before we would have to do anything. So that's
Okay.
salt or mechanical removal.
Hmm. But you still are when you go out to plow, then salting.
So when we do the mechanical removal, we would usually salt after the mechanical removal.
Mm.
It's extremely light. We'd be doing 100 pounds a lane mile with some, and most of the time we're treating with it pre-wet.
Yeah.
If it's supposed to be done snowing, we wouldn't pre-wet, and we would just be salting just straight granular on a really light form. I have our trucks calibrated. We go down to 100 pounds a lane mile. And our guys actually like the lane split sometimes too. So we're not just treating one lane at 100 pounds a lane mile. We would split two lanes. So roughly it's 50 pounds a lane mile.
I think that added context is great to kind of explain how it's really helping. So sometimes like no additional salting or plowing, any treatment
Mhm.
is needed. Sometimes with a bigger storm, like I said, a heavier wet storm, there's more there to melt. And if you need to, you're going out again, but I mean, 100 pounds a lane mile is a pretty low rate. I know a lot of
Extremely.
agencies don't even have, the truck set up to do that, right? Especially based on, yeah, auger size is a real big limitation. But that's great. I'm gonna not dominate the conversation. I want to see if there are any questions here in the chat that have come in on the YouTube chat. I don't see any right now though. So let me go back. Um, the other thing I think I wanted to just like share for people. So every gallon of brine has about 2.2 pounds in it. So when Ricky's talking about like 50 gallons of lean mile, that's the equivalent of about 110 pounds of rock salt. And then, if you jump step that up to 100 pounds, or sorry, 100 gallons of lean mal, that's about 220 pounds of salt. So if you're in that more like 80, 70, now we're talking, like 150, 170 some pounds a lane mile.
It's funny, I should have actually brought that up in my presentation is roughly we were treating roadways at 300 with rock salt.
Prior to
So
getting
yeah,
into the liquids. Yeah.
prior
Yep.
to liquids.
Mhm.
And that was basically when I was hired here as a
Mhm.
general laborer. So they were doing about 300 pounds a lane mile, roughly. Obviously, some trucks are going to be a little bit more, some are going to be a little bit less. But basically, that's what we were at. So, I mean, if you think about, if you do the math, I mean, you get salt savings just by doing that.
Yeah. So if you're at 70, 80 for a pre-treatment and then a post-treatment of 100 kind of granular, then I mean, that's getting pretty close to the 300, pounds lane mile. But for all those light events where you're able to get away with just the liquid, that's where
Yep.
you're really seeing those
And most of the
savings.
time, most of the time we would only really salt if the temperatures are going to be lower. And I mean,
Mhm.
we've made some serious steps with our which our weather stuff. We have
Yeah.
in-road sensors now, and to help us make determination if we should be doing liquid or not, or using granular with pre-wet. And if it's going to be super cold out after we mechanical removal, obviously you should be putting down something because it's possible it could still freeze. Uh,
Yeah.
for us, we can't rely on the liquid that it's still there. We have to play it safe. Like I said, a lot of our roads are very high traffic. It's kind of unfortunate for us that we have to treat them that way because it would probably save us even way more if we had less traffic on our roads.
Mhm.
But I mean, 100 pounds a lane mile really isn't that much. And like I said, we do lane splitting too. I mean, I do it when I go out and salt. So if you're doing 100 pounds a lane mile and you're doing two lanes, you're technically 50 pounds a lane mile. And I don't have our trucks set to go that low. Yeah, I have it set at 100. I have it set in steps of 50. So it's 100, 150, 200, 250. And I think I cap our trucks at 500. Um, and there's only a few that have like the manual setting, and that's in case of like we have a water main break and there's a whole bunch of water on the roadway and in the middle of the night and it gets cleaned off and they need to salt ice because it's basically just this thick of ice. You got to be able to put down a little bit more so you can get it to work. And obviously you can do pre-wet with that too. So um it has made a huge difference in our operations. The fact that we cut the salt down, it does kind of it's difficult knowing that we can scrape up and you just don't know what the liquid's going to do after. Obviously brine is mixed to 23.3%, but as a wet snowstorm with wet and heavy snow, high moisture content snow, that's going to get diluted a lot faster. So we use salt to contradict that, and it's been working for us and it works great. I mean, we haven't had any black ice after a snowstorm at all. And we're not treating at 500 pounds a lane mile. We plow our roads and then maybe we'll be putting down 200. And we'll be pre-wetting extremely light just so we don't get the bounce and scatter off the road. And again, we've still seen huge savings so far. So
That's great.
I,
I mean, yeah,
I
the
take it it
savings is
works.
like the proof is in the pudding there, right? And I think it
Yeah.
would be good to add in, I don't know if we can do this on this presentation, but maybe I can add it in later, the numbers. So if you are able to go back, maybe talk with your staff a little bit more and just see if we can get a little data table of, previous winters, kind of how much total salt has gone down either in brine form or rock salt form. I know you mentioned also kind of looking at like fuel costs, right? And labor, like all that information is really great as we work to get more municipalities on board so they can see, big picture, you really have this opportunity for savings. So, yeah, great. Thank you, Ricky. I'm going to
No
check again
problem.
here. If we got any questions from the viewers. Um, which I don't see. So we do have a few people who are on. So thank you for joining in. Please share this webinar with other folks. It'll be available on the chat. Same link. And I also wanted to, I guess, give a little bit of a shout out for our webinar next month. April is actually going to be on those remote weather stations, like Ricky was talking about, that Glendale recently has purchased, or I guess leased. You got technically right. And I think you guys went. Did you guys go with the Vicewa, the Horizon X
Yeah.
weather
Yeah.
stations? Yeah. So we have Eric from Vicewa, and then we also have, I think it's Matt from Frost Solutions. So both of them have different options for remote weather stations that are being used by municipalities and counties in Wisconsin, so that, kind of like Ricky said, you can have that weather, and not weather, just weather, but pavement data, which is just so
Huge.
crucial, right?
Yeah, it's
When
huge.
you're trying to make these decisions, what are the temperatures, out there, and what do we think, where are they headed? Do we need more salt? Do we need to go out? Are we going to be able to make it? So, yeah.
It was a huge game changer getting those. Instead of having to come into road temp roads, now I can look on my phone
Love that. Love
before I
that for
have to
you,
come
Ricky.
in because it's a waste of a
Yeah.
trip otherwise.
No, I mean, I have been out during a number of snow events for the city of Madison to try to get some photos with a friend of mine who's a photographer. And yeah, for the city, kind of making that call, like, are we going? Are we not going? Are we pushing it back? Are we? And
Yeah.
yeah, once you're in the midst of those kind of, I don't want to say chaotic, but for me, kind of like nail biting, conversations and decision making processes, I'm like, oh, I'm glad this is not my job full time. So kudos to you.
Yeah, I ain't got to
For
make
doing
those
that
decisions.
and
That's above me.
being a part of those conversations, I guess. But thanks again, Ricky. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll be in touch. And thanks everybody else for joining in.
Thank you, Alice.